Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Humanities Cafe. My name is Stacy Tadaush. I'm the program coordinator here at the South Dakota Humanities Council, and I'm happy that you could join us. First thing I wanted to tell everybody is a housekeeping piece at the very beginning here. If anyone was trying to watch or join us for Humanities Cafe 2 weeks ago and you couldn't get in, we had a housekeeping issue with the link not working, and we were unaware. So I sincerely apologize for that. You can watch the session, the cafe session from a couple weeks ago on our YouTube channel. And if you have any questions about that, go ahead and email me here. But for today, we're going to talk about the teacher shortage in South Dakota. It's graduation season. You know, high school graduates are beginning their journey into adulthood, and college grads are embarking on their new careers. There are undoubtedly a wide range of options available for these young people, but how many of them are embarking on the journey to become a teacher? According to recent trends and statistics, not enough. South Dakota and the entire nation are facing a significant teacher shortage, and it's having a major impact on the future of our young people. That's what we're going to talk about today. So joining me for this discussion are two professionals in the field of education. I have Dr. Daniel Mourlam and Dr. Kyle Kopplin. Gentlemen, please take a moment to introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about what you do. You guys can decide who wants to go first.
I can go first. So hi everybody, my name is Dan Mourlam. I am a associate professor and chair of the Teacher Residency and Education Division in the School of Ed at the University of South Dakota. I teach classes in teaching methods, educational technology are my primary focus areas, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. And I do research on the knowledge that teachers need to have to successfully teach with technologies. Great to be here.
Thank you. And Dr. Kopplin?
Everyone, my name is Kyle. I teach economics. I teach at all levels of economics here at Black Hill State University, from principles, intermediate theory to MBA. In my spare time, I am curious about how taxing districts, fiscal districts raise money. And so I do a lot of research for the state of South Dakota through the Dakota Institute, where I really focus on property taxes and how that affects people's decision making and how it affects school districts. Thanks so much for the invitation. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us, both of you. So we're going to drive right in because there's a lot to unpack here. So teacher shortages create a myriad of challenges, right? There's increased class sizes, lack of academic course offerings, limited extracurricular classes, potential burnout of the staff. So there's a lot to unpack. And let's start with the basics. What are the statistics and trends related to the nationwide teacher shortage? Let's rip the Band-Aid off right away. Dr. Mourlam, do you want to touch that, or?
Oh, sorry, I thought you were gonna share on that. Sorry about that.
Oh, no.
Oh yeah, no, I think there's a massive teacher shortage both in South Dakota and across the United States. I think this was a concern many years ago, kind of as the baby boomer generation was getting ready to retire, and we were worried about it then. A number of years back, when we were looking at the statistics around new teachers entering the profession and how long they stay in the profession, it was around 40% of new teachers in the first 5 years tend to leave the profession, which is a large number of new teachers. So we weren't really replacing the number of teachers that we needed, kind of at the same pace that we have people retiring and leaving the profession, kind of in general. So there's definitely a teacher shortage. Even today, I was contacted by a principal from another state, even seeking, do you have any graduates that could help fill I think it was a middle school social studies position. So there's definitely a demand for more teachers out there, for sure.
Well, and I did a little bit of digging, and according to the Learning Policy Institute, the total number of teachers, according to the U.S. Department of Education in 2023, was 3,224,967. In 2024, it dropped, just a little bit to 3,210,436. But in 2023, the estimated minimum number of teachers not fully certified for their teaching assignments and or the minimum number of unfilled positions was 314,000, and in 2024 it was 406,000. So in 1 year there was 100,000 open positions that weren't filled across the nation. And those shortages apparently have been increasing substantially since the pandemic. So USD has a teacher preparation program. Enrollments in those programs have been declining since back in the early 2010s. What's it look like at USD?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So at USD, prior to the pandemic, so in 2019, our enrollment was actually one of the largest cohorts we'd had in a while. So our enrollment was actually looking pretty good. And then, like most institutions across the US, once the pandemic hit, we had a pretty steep enrollment drop. And it's taken a few years, but we've climbed kind of back out of that to a level where we had been at least in our undergrad program, to where we had been prior to the pandemic. But where we're seeing greater success now is, or more success, I guess, than what we've had in the past, is recruiting people that are looking for a career change. Maybe they started out in business and healthcare or something else. They have their undergraduate bachelor's degree and they decide, I want to be a teacher. And at USD, we have programs in elementary education, secondary education, and special education that lead to initial teacher certification, so they can get their teaching license, as well as a master's degree, which in some districts sets them up for, higher pay, those kinds of things. So that group, over the last couple years, that has actually gone up quite a bit. And we have one of our largest cohorts ever in our kind of our graduate level teacher cert program. I think we're going to have maybe around, I want to say like 50 student teachers or something like that, just out of the graduate program in the spring next year. So we have a large group going through. We certainly hope that trend continues because we definitely need more teachers across the board.
Yeah, I noted the Economic Policy Institute projects a deficit of roughly 200,000 public school teachers by the 2005-2006 school year nationwide. So in South Dakota, and I know Dr. Kopplin, you've looked at these numbers specifically. So in South Dakota, how does the trend here compare or contract with that nationally? What's South Dakota looking like?
I mean, South Dakota has many of the same problems as other states, but we have the sort of the misnomer that, hey, South Dakota doesn't have an income tax, and so it seems like a draw. But when you actually look at the differentials, what your post-income tax salary would be in our neighboring states relative to what it is here, it turns into a wash, and South Dakota might even be worse after income tax. And so that in itself presents a challenge for keeping people here. So even if we can educate them in our state, it presents challenges to keeping our talent in South Dakota, because even our adjacent neighbors offer a little bit better salaries, even adjusting for taxes. So that in itself can cause a shortage in our state.
Well, and I took a look at the South Dakota report card and the South Dakota Department of Education's instructional turnover and vacancy report. And as of 2023-2024, well, in 2024, there was a number of unfilled positions was 353, as opposed to 2021, which is 174. So that's a huge increase. But according to the South Dakota report card for last year, there were 10,041 teachers with the average years of experience at 13 and a half, right? But 14, almost 15% have three or fewer years of experience, and 5% are teaching out of their field. So older teachers are retiring, and the new teachers are leaving the state at a higher rate. That's going to leave us in kind of a pinch. So because of those vacancies, a little over 24% of the positions remain vacant, and 30% gave the duties to existing staff, while 19% eliminated courses or programs. The Associated School Boards of South Dakota reported around 300 vacant teaching positions as of March of this year. So we're clearly in a situation where we got to do something about it and do it well. So with the numbers that are needed to fill these positions, the shortages are in all content areas, right? But it's apparently most significant in CTE, elementary education, language arts, social studies, science, and special education. So, and it's not just the current teachers leaving the field, but fewer people entering the positions to replace them. So my question is this a matter of not having enough prospective candidates? Or is it because there's an increase in turnover? Or is it both? What are we looking at? What's causing this?
Yeah, I would say it's probably a matter of both of those issues. I think we don't have the numbers that we need to replace the population that's leaving the profession or they're retiring from the profession. There's just not enough people entering, teacher education programs to fill those positions. And again, that was a concern before the pandemic, and it continues certainly to be a concern now. But I also think that there's high teacher turnover. If we had before the pandemic, even we had 40% of new teachers leaving the profession within the first 5 years. That's far too many that are leaving right away. You got to find ways to make sure that they're supported, whether it's through mentoring, professional development, whatever it might be, so they can persist longer into their careers and stay as a teacher, because we certainly need them.
So I'm gonna, I know you have a good grasp on this, Dr. Mourlam. So I want to know, and I want to share with our viewers, what are the current qualifications for K through 12 teachers? I know they vary from state to state. So nationwide, as compared to South Dakota, are you aware of any significant differences in the broader nationwide? Is there an underlying, hey, this is what you have to have, and then compare that to South Dakota?
I mean, generally speaking, nationwide, and I don't know every state's requirements because they are different by state. Each state issues its own teaching licenses. But when we look at kind of the similarities, you got to typically have your 4-year degree. You have to have participated in some kind of teacher education program. And then they start to vary a little bit after that. There may be licensure exams. South Dakota has those. So like you have to pass both a content exam, whatever it is that you're going to teach, so that's math or science or whatever it might be. But then you also have to pass a teaching and learning exam to kind of show that you know information around teaching and learning. So there's a variety of different requirements that states have. And in my experience, I've been working in USD or at USD for 10 years now. And typically, if a student gets certified, gets their South Dakota teaching license, but then they, their family moves or something like that, they go to another state and they're going to apply for out-of-state licensure. Typically, they're able to get that relatively easily in most states. Maybe not in all states, but certainly in many of our neighboring states, they may have like 1 or 2 requirements that they have to wrap up once they are in their new state. So like, think of it for people that come from out of state into South Dakota. Typically, it's the South Dakota Indian Studies course that many people have to take once they get here. So that would be an example of like one of those requirements. And I think in South Dakota, the Department of Ed works pretty well with people from out of state that want to teach here, and they give them like a conditional license or something like that to ensure that they can begin teaching, and then they have a period of time, like a year or 2, something like that, to wrap up any requirements they may have.
And in terms of that piece with the Indian Studies course that they have to take to gain their licensure in South Dakota, is that pretty readily available once they get here? I mean, how often is that offered, and how is it offered? Because I think there's also a piece about they have to take a suicide prevention training course as well. Are those readily available for anybody coming in?
Yeah, so I'll talk specifically about the Indian Studies course, because we offer that. The suicide prevention course, I think that's an online training of some kind that they can do. But the Indian Studies course, that's readily available. We offer multiple sections at USD of that course each semester, because not only do the people coming from out of state need that class, the people within South Dakota also need to take that class. So we have several sections of that every semester. And we have sections offered in person, but we also have sections offered online. That way, you live across the state, you're not near a university or a campus or whatever it might be. You can still get into those courses. So there's, I think, quite a bit of access to those classes across the state, because that's just the USD, and all the teacher ed programs in South Dakota offer a version of that class.
Okay, I want to open it up. There's a question in the chat, and I want to open it up to anybody who has a question. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, you can either put it in the chat or just raise your hand, and we'll get to it. Tara asked, is there a region of South Dakota that is suffering more so than others to be filled? That's a good question.
That is a good question. I don't know if I have any data on that. I don't know, Kyle, if you do or not, but
We'll say that district by district, the teacher salaries vary district by district, like unsurprisingly. But recent changes in minimum teacher salaries is putting a bigger squeeze on certain districts than others. And so for the districts that were already above the legal minimum of 45,000, it's not going to affect them as much. But for the districts that were at the previous minimum of 35,000, and when I say minimum, I mean a teacher with a bachelor's degree with no years of experience. And so a brand new, fresh, recently graduated teacher. So that would be the baseline salary. And so generally speaking, teacher salaries in South Dakota are based off of your education, your years of experience. And so that's what I mean by base. So for these districts that aren't currently at the new minimum salary, that's going to cause substantial squeezing in their district where they now have to meet the statewide minimum. And so I suspect that that will make maybe not hiring harder, but I think it'll make funding existing teachers harder.
And to add to that, I do think that rural communities tend to struggle more than more suburban and urban communities to recruit new teachers. So I do think that's maybe, in a way, part of an answer to your question.
Okay. Does anybody else have a question, comment? Do we have any teachers in the group?
Are there incentives like per district too? Like, are they offering like incentives to have teachers come in, especially those rural areas? I mean, housing like in our area is super hard to find, it seems too, for trying to get a teacher in. You'd have to also, do some of that legwork as far as, housing availabilities and some of that. Is there like certain incentives to come into different districts or regions of South Dakota that over others as well?
I know in some of the job ads that, principals and superintendents have shared with me, they have indicated that, for special education teachers, whoever we hire will get, so much of like maybe a signing bonus or something like that. So some schools are doing those kinds of things. I don't know about like housing, the kind of benefits or something like that they might also be offering to teachers. But I do know some schools do offer a signing bonus for those really hard to fill positions.
I've
And
noticed.
Sharon asked a question. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Kyle.
Well, related to the previous question, I've noticed that some districts, especially rural districts, especially those with low enrollment as well, the school funding formula basically says what the state aid's going to be, but those local districts do more outside of the state funding formula. And a couple of examples are transfers from the county government. They also do things like banking franchise taxes. They do utility taxes, renewable energy taxes, and so they have these special levies that can help raise funds outside of the normal state funding formula, and that's really common in districts, like I said, that either don't have a lot of enrollment or have a more rural flavor, or otherwise don't have a lot of sales taxes specifically.
That's interesting. So like in the more, even in like the consolidated, when it used to be so many more schools and now they're more and more consolidated, is that like a good funding option for them? I mean, is that kind of what everybody's going to have to turn to?
That's a good question. And so I think if memory serves, like 15 years ago, there was something like 180 or 175 public school districts, and now it's down under 150. And so that's been like 25 districts that have consolidated into other ones. And so the most recent one, I think, I'm going to forget, but there was one just last year. Anyway, that's a really good question. I'm not sure how that might be a benefit, but it seems to be a trend, especially after the Great Recession. And so there must be something to it. Sharing resources, sharing a tax base, those kinds of things.
Okay. There's a couple more questions in the chat. Sharon asked, and we're going to touch on this a little bit later too, but how much is employing teachers from other countries being used, bringing in international teachers?
I know it's used in some schools, just I know like Sioux Falls has like a dual immersion language program, and they have some teachers that they employ from other countries that come in, but I'm not sure across South Dakota how much that's used. I just know of pockets here and there where it's been used before.
Okay, and then Dell asks, how does South Dakota rank nationally in terms of shortage and pay? I know that in pay, I think I saw that we're 49th in the nation. But how do we rank in terms of shortage?
Uh, I guess I don't know the answer to that question specifically. I just know that everybody is kind of dealing with the same issues. Maybe Kyle, I don't know if you have any information on this, but
I'm not sure in terms of like the percentage teacher shortage that we would have. But the teacher pay, it's not a big secret that we're far behind. And like I said, that's even true adjusting for cost of living, even true adjusting for the fact that we don't have a state income tax.
And that's something that Dell actually asked again in the chat. Would we be able to pay better if we had a state income tax?
It's a complicated question. And so generally speaking, our state is tax averse. And so even this last year, expecting a sales tax shortfall in the coming year, the state legislature voted to decrease property taxes, or not decrease property taxes necessarily, but increase the restrictions on collecting property tax revenue, which is a little bit surprising. But it seems to be based on recent trends in our state legislature that we're a tax averse state. And so hypothetically, if we introduced a state income tax, which is extremely unlikely, but it would make the share of the budget larger. And so for perspective, I think in South Dakota, it's something like a seventh of our overall state budget goes to K-12 education, and another seventh-ish goes to the border regions. And so it's not for lack of effort. It's almost a third of our spending is going toward education, both K-12 and tertiary. So hypothetically, I suppose, yeah, having an income tax would increase the size of the pie and potentially increase the dollar volume for all of the spending categories. But again, I think it's extremely unlikely that that would happen based on the political climate.
Okay, thank you for that. So we're gonna pivot a little bit here and talk a little bit about why, right? So a 2022 national survey found that fewer than 1 in 5 Americans would encourage a young person to become a K-12 teacher. And Harvard, of all places, dropped its undergrad teaching program in 2023 due to lack of interest or enrollment, and others are following suit at a pretty rapid rate. So why? What's the overall in the field of education, Dr. Mourlam? What's the ripple? Why are universities saying, you know what, let's just forget about it? Is it the only option they really have?
Not sure I fully understood your question. Could you repeat that one more time? I think
Well, Harvard dropped its undergrad education program because of lack of enrollment. And it seems trending that a lot of other universities are following suit. Why is it just the piece that there's a lack of enrollment numbers are down, or is there other factors involved with that?
I guess I haven't heard too much about programs dropping their teacher education degree programs. I think there's been maybe some consolidation in ways that make sense, as we have certain programs that maybe were popular in the past that maybe aren't as popular now, and those maybe have gone away, and new ones maybe come up in their place. But I think if you think about Harvard maybe getting rid of their education program, that's maybe a different pool than what we would be doing here, serving different needs than maybe what we'd be serving in like the state of South Dakota. I think we're here to serve the state of South Dakota and prepare teachers. So like I know our teach program isn't going in anywhere anytime soon. So I guess that's the answer I have for you.
It just seems strange to me that an institution like Harvard would drop an undergrad education program, and I'm grateful that USD is hanging in there. I think South Dakota's got some good education programs all around. But let's talk about the factors that are affecting the teacher recruitment and retention. We've talked about low pay. Obviously, pay is low and the stress is high. But nationwide, the other factors involved. where that, lack of support, shrinking teacher pipeline, high turnover, unrealistic pressure and expectations, and political interference, all those types of things. There's been lots of changes over the years, right? Like teachers that went into the profession 30 years ago, they didn't have to keep up with technology like they do now. They didn't have, the cultural, well, I guess, cultural wars that are a thing nationally with the book banning and what's taught and how, that kind of thing. They didn't have active shooter drills. Um, so things like that, of course, are going to affect people's desire to want to go into the field. But how does that reflect in South Dakota specifically? Um, we have, of course, we had COVID and there's political division and um, there's salary and funding challenges and things like that. But what else are some of the factors that are kind of limiting people from going into the education field in South Dakota?
Well, I think when we look at kind of pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, something that's changed, I think, are the needs that the learners in our schools have. I think that there are more behavior-based needs in our schools than maybe there were before. So there might be a gap there in terms of, providing the support that both the teacher and the students might need to be successful. Because you think about some of the trauma that families went through during the pandemic, whether that was, death of a family member, losing a job, maybe housing insecurity, food insecurity, whatever that might have been. Those things persist. Even though we're kind of in this post-pandemic world, those issues are going to continue to be issues that, children need support getting through. And when they're dealing with some of these traumas in their life, it's hard to focus on whatever the content of a lesson might be, because you have other needs that need to be kind of addressed ahead of time. So I think, I'm in schools pretty regularly. I teach a class that we go into a school and we actually teach, elementary students different things. And just conversations with teachers, that's one of the things that comes up pretty regularly is kind of these behavior issues. It's just different is usually how they describe it to me. Things are just different than what they maybe were prior to the pandemic. So they're working on adjusting to some of those things. And that creates a lot of stress for teachers when they're dealing with things that maybe, I don't know the exact right answer in this moment. And they're trying to figure that out. And when that persists and maybe there's, extra duties because, with the teacher shortage, they're taking on extra tasks. Maybe they don't have as many aides or supports in the school. So they're having to do more on their own. I think over time that takes a toll on a person. And that's probably a reason why you don't want to stay in the profession. But then it's also, I think, impacting people that look at education as a career pathway and think, oh, this might be a ton of work. Am I really in it? For that, knowing that the pay is going to be pretty low, right? You always say that you don't go into education because of the pay, right? You do it to change lives and to help students and to help people in general. But pay does matter. I think that's an important piece, not to lose focus on.
Yeah, I think the phrase I've heard before is that educators aren't in it for the income, but the outcome. And I think, it's a specific kind of mentality, not necessarily mentality, but you have to really want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be passionate about it. And I think it takes a special kind of person to go into the field of education, especially now with the increasing expectations and challenges and declining resources to do it with. The big piece, I think some other things that I've noticed when doing this research was, the lack of support and undervaluing of teachers, the rural isolation piece that Tara mentioned, being in rural communities, how do you attract young people in particular to come and want to stay in a rural area with the housing and things like that, and the disenchantment piece of teachers just losing that spark because there's so many challenges and so much stress and the weight of the world seems heavy, right? But I want to talk to Dr. Kopplin about some work that he did for the Dakota Institute, particularly the Dakota Institute is a nonprofit economic research organization. And Dr. Kopplin, you did a piece for them. So what made you decide to look at the issue of teacher pay in South Dakota, and what specifically did you look at?
Yeah. Well, teaching and education is very personal to me. My parents have collectively over 40 years of classroom K-12 experience, mostly in the Meade School District in Sturgis. And so as a person growing up in that environment where my parents were both teachers, like I saw a lot of this stuff, but I didn't really understand it. And so that sort of base, and then asking these questions like, well, is South Dakota really that low in teacher salary? Like, are we really that far behind our neighbors even? Do income taxes matter? So all of those questions I had in my mind. Now that I have different training, I was able to answer, and so that's sort of what lit the fire. And so answering those questions for myself, and so what I ended up finding, and I really looked at the last 6 years in particular, or excuse me, 6 year period from 2017 to 2023. And so like across this COVID period, including these periods of really high inflation in the post-COVID period. And so from the federal government perspective, one of the things that we saw was a lot of spending to try to ease the blow of the COVID pandemic, and so that persisted into 2021 and 22, and we saw CPI inflation very high above expectations, and so that inflationary pressure squeezed a lot of different industries, but specifically teachers. And so when you have school districts that make budgets like 18 months, 24 months in advance, and then you get all this unexpected inflation, then the purchasing power that you have for the money that you budgeted doesn't go as far. And so inflation itself causes increases in costs. And so you end up seeing teacher salaries specifically, or all salaries, but teacher salaries in particular, lagging behind inflation. And so I think one of the main results of that was over that 6 year period from 17 to 23, price adjusted teacher salaries fell by about 22%. And that's a big squeeze for anybody, and that's over a 6 year period. And now, granted, there are some attempts to ease that blow. There's a special advisory board that is attempting to figure out inflation-adjusted teacher target salaries, which is pretty close to keeping up with CPI inflation. And so those recommendations then get considered and voted on in the state legislature. And I think that some of those targets, or at least a level fraction of those targets, get put into the to the state aid formula. So there are efforts in order to make teacher salaries keep up with inflation. But any industry where you have relatively slow wage growth, like in education, that's going to be impacted by unexpected inflation extremely, extremely dramatically.
Just for clarification, what is CPI inflation?
Excuse me. The consumer price index is the main way in which we try to calculate how prices are changing. And so, what did we buy last year? What are the prices? Let's take that same bundle that people bought last year, and let's figure out what these prices are doing over time. And so that's the main one. And so there is a national CPI, there is a Midwest specific CPI, which it tends to be a little lower, so we don't have inflationary pressures from coastal regions. And so when I did that research, it was focused on the Midwest specific CPI.
Okay.
How
So
prices are changing in a region.
From 2023 to 2024, there was a 5.8% increase in teacher pay. But in the article that I read that included information about your research, you said teacher salaries are rising, but ultimately it could be that even though salaries are up, teachers are actually worse off. Is that because of the inflation adjusted pay? What does inflation adjusted pay mean?
Right. And so say hypothetically in 2022, inflation was something like 8 or 9%, just for easy figuring. And so that means that from 2022 to 2023, your purchasing power fell by that much. So you walk into a grocery store and you buy, I don't know why you would do this, but you buy 10 pounds of hamburger all at once. You walk into the same grocery store the next year, you buy the same hamburger, and you can only buy 9 pounds, give or take. So, like, consumers make much more complicated decisions than that, of course, but highlights the idea. So, even if your wage is increasing in nominal terms, so your contracted amount, even if that's increasing, that's not taking into account the cost of living adjustment due to changes in inflation. So if, say, teacher salary increases by 5.5%, but inflation is 8%, then your actual purchasing power is the negative differential. So you're actually losing 2.5% buying power, even though your number of dollars that you have in your bank account has increased by 5 or 5.5.
Thank you for that explanation. As I was hoping you, because I was like, how do you explain this a little bit easier? So that was excellent. So with that loss of spending power, how and you kind of touched on this, but I'm hoping you can expand on it a little bit. How does the inflationary costs impact public education as compared to other professions? You know, the salary piece. How does inflation impact educators more so than other professions?
Sure. And so the in the weeds answer is the way school districts raise money. They have a series of different levies. Generally speaking, teacher salaries come out of something called the general fund. And there are limitations on the general fund. Specifically, general funds have what's called a rate cap, which means that part of like when you calculate revenues, it's the property tax rate times the assessed value. And so you figure out the assessed taxable base in a school district, you multiply that times the property tax rate, and then you figure out your revenue. So school districts have a rate cap, which is a way to limit the amount of property taxes. They also have an inflation adjustment, and they have a build-up adjustment. And so inflation determines sort of the maximum amount of property taxes that most districts, including counties and cities, can collect. And it's usually the lower of CPI inflation, or 3%. So if you have a ton of unexpected inflation, the state says you can only collect up to 3% more property taxes than you collected last year as a result of this inflationary pressure. And so any unexpected inflation causes shortfalls all over the board in terms of local funding. School districts don't have that specific revenue cap, that 3% adjustment, but any limitation that impacts the general fund is going to impact teacher salaries, because that's the main source that teacher salaries get paid out of, teacher salaries and benefits.
Thank you for that clarification. And I think I'm sitting here thinking, you know, the irony of this all is, you know, there's the whole scarcity drives demand, right? And I'm sure there's a technical term for that thought. But you know, with the dwindling pool of qualified teachers, it seems like when the ranks of the teachers have been decimated or get so low, we'll finally have to start paying them more. And it's just, you know, when all these other pieces come into play, it makes it really complicated. Let's take a break here. There's some questions in the chat. I'm going to just go right down the line. Jennifer asked, does our state's shortage come mainly from young people not going into teaching, or is retention of existing teachers also a significant issue? Do those two factors need to be addressed in different ways? Excellent question.
Yeah, I think it's probably both, or is what we're looking at. We don't have maybe enough people going into the profession, and too many people are leaving the profession before they reach retirement. So I think we have to support both groups, because I think the needs that a new teacher might have are going to be radically different than maybe the needs that a more veteran teacher might have. So I think you customize the support and any professional development, mentoring, whatever it is that teachers need to the needs of the actual teacher that you're working with. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Okay, and then Christina asks, have you seen an increase in homeschooling, which could possibly be linked to the lack of teachers? And related to that, Sharon wants to know, does homeschool teaching have an effect?
Well, I don't know if there's been a large increase in homeschooling. I think for many parents, this probably isn't an option, because they, need to, if they're a dual income family, they both need to, parents need to be able to work. So homeschooling may not be an option for them. And then does homeschooling have an effect? I think that's be a complicated question. Effect on what is, I guess, the question I would have. And I think the answer is, it might depend. It may have a impact on the needs of the child that's being homeschooled. Because in some cases, maybe there's issues at school or something like that, and there's a very good reason for doing homeschooling. Or there's certain belief systems that certain families have that they want to. The reason why they do homeschooling. There's lots of reasons why you'd homeschool. But I do think that when census time comes around for schools and they kind of check to see what their enrollment is, since I think the funding is tied to their enrollment, that does have an effect on how much money comes into a school. So I definitely think it has an impact in that way.
Okay. Dill asks, are there any radical solutions such as online classes?
I do think there are some options for online classes. When you take an online class, you need to make sure that the student is going to be a self-starter. They're going to be able to keep the deadlines, things like that. It's more complicated than showing up and you have a teacher that's there that's going to direct you in exactly what you need to do. So I'm sure there are radical solutions out there. I think we hear some of those ideas off and on, especially in times like this when we don't have a lot of people going into teaching. And I think radical ideas sometimes lead to really good ideas that we could actually implement. So I think all ideas are always a good thing. It's a good starting point.
Okay, and Tara asked a good question here too, and it was something kind of related to what I was going to ask next. Are resources in place for teachers for that burnout factor you mentioned to support them for mental health? Because whatever the potential solution is, they need to take into consideration the teacher well-being, right? When in creating or implementing any potential solutions, but are there any in place now?
I think it's going to vary district by district on what support structures they have. I'm pretty sure there's a shortage of mental health professionals in our society, so I think that's going to be a challenge that we're running into as well. So finding someone to speak to about whatever challenges someone might be facing is certainly an issue. I also think making sure that once we find someone that they can talk to, that the teachers have a way to pay for those things. Is it covered by health insurance and some of those kinds of things? I know that may not be the case in all locations for all teachers.
So with that in mind, let's talk about some potential solutions. Okay, so recruitment initiatives is first on my list of let's talk about it. There is some career interest groups like Educators Rising in 2017, USD's Teacher Pathway Program. What are some recruitment initiatives that are happening right now?
Yeah, so we're doing all kinds of recruitment. That's like been one of our big pushes over the last few years, especially when our enrollment kind of dipped down. We were like, how can we get more people entering our programs in the profession in general? So we do have our teacher pathway program that started way back in like the 2017 era. And that's where high schoolers can start taking some high school dual credit classes in education. They take typically like a educational foundations type class, field experience course, those kinds of things. In addition to other dual credits they might do like in their math class or science class or something like that. So that's been a good recruitment tool as they get kind of a taste for what it might be like to be a teacher. So that is certainly one technique that we're doing, and we started in Sioux Falls schools and we've expanded to other schools kind of in the southeast part of the state, and now over the last year, we've gotten a grant where we are looking at how we can do that with more rural communities, kind of more to the west part of the state. So Dr. Jackie Wilbur and the Compass Network are kind of leading that effort through USD as well. So we're also, we expanded our program, our elementary education program to our campus in Sioux Falls at USD Sioux Falls. And that was specifically to really help because there's a high need in Sioux Falls specifically for more teachers. And there are a number of people that are interested in becoming a teacher, but they don't have their 4-year degree yet. So this provides a pathway for them to get that 4-year degree in elementary education. We offer the classes in the late afternoon, early evening, those kind of things, so that they can, work all day and then they come to school for a couple hours at night, 2, 3 days a week, something like that, to get their classes in. Earlier, I mentioned our master's level programs that we have in elementary, secondary, and special education. We have programs in place through our professional development center where we work with individual school districts, and some of those teachers can get discounts on or some of those students can get discounts on their tuition to be able to go to school, get their master's degree, and get their initial teaching certification. So that's been, a really good avenue for us. And then the alternative teacher certification program has also been a great opportunity for many people interested in becoming a 7 through 12 classroom teacher, because they can start working almost immediately if they have a school that's ready to hire them to teach, maybe middle school math or high school math, whatever it might be. And for a lot of our students that go through the coursework we offer in that program, they also sign up for our master's degree program in secondary education. So they're going to be able to start earning as a teacher and working in a school and getting that experience right away. But then they're taking classes and learning, the pedagogy and instructional strategies, those kind of things that then they can implement as they're going through the first few years in the program. And then they graduate with a master's degree. And that just makes them more qualified, more highly qualified for being a classroom teacher. So I feel like we're doing a lot to try to recruit new teachers in. We're kind of trying to leave no stone unturned, kind of hitting both the people entering the profession from more of an undergraduate lens, as well as those that are thinking about changing careers and doing a graduate program. So there's lots of recruitment efforts that we're trying to go out there, and we're always trying to add more things onto because there's such a need right now.
What's tell us a little bit more, if you can, about the teacher apprenticeship program for like the paras that are currently in the classroom and want to move into a teaching position.
Yeah, so USD has an apprenticeship program, and that's part of that grant where we're taking that teacher pathway program to rural communities throughout the state and more the western part of the state. So it works more or less like our current teacher pathway program. High school students start taking those dual credit classes, but then they can get some discounts on their tuition once they come to campus at USD, and they take their classes as a cohort. So they're kind of going together, going through the program together, which helps with, as they have questions, come into, any kind of roadblocks or barriers or things like that. There's a support community for them to go through this together. And then they complete we do a year-long teacher residency program where they do all day, every day student teaching. They can go back to their home communities and do that. And then, at the end, they're ready for the state mentoring program and kind of that induction into the profession.
And that program, that just when they finish the program, they're not contractually required to stay in the state, though, right?
That I'm not 100% sure on because I'm not the one running that grant, but I think many of them, the goal of this program, and it's brand new, so we haven't had anyone graduate from it yet. But I think the goal of the program is to really help kind of fill those needs in the communities they come from. So kind of like a grow your own kind of idea. So they're going back to their own communities.
Okay. And so what are your thoughts on it's been mentioned, I know California's got a program going on, but what do you think about standardization of teaching credentials or certification requirements across all 50 states? Is that even realistic? Because like we talked about earlier, every state their requirements are different. Is there a potential for a standardized across the board certification system? Is that even feasible?
I don't think that's probably likely to happen. I think each state has their own priorities that they want to make sure that their teachers are able to achieve in their classrooms. And I also kind of look at what's kind of been going on over the last few months at the federal level, and there seems to be a downsizing of the scope of the federal government. So this would actually be an expansion if we were to have kind of a national credentialing system for teachers. So I don't, in my opinion, I guess my personal opinion, I don't think that's likely to happen. But we never know. I guess we'll see.
Tara asked, does the cost of schooling to become an educator versus the pay they will receive in that position play a part in enrollment?
I mean, I suppose it can, because teachers don't get paid very much. So that's certainly a concern. I guess I don't know more specifics beyond that.
Okay. And then something I'm wondering if you can speak to this a little bit. I know that there was recently approved by the legislature a student teacher stipend program.
Mhm.
I think of $500,000 and then grants of up to $5,000 per district available to for payment to one or more student teachers.
Mhm.
And piece about giving them teacher of record designation. What could you tell us a little bit more about that? Or is it, I understanding that it's pretty new for student teachers, but how does that play out?
Yeah, so that's a brand new program. It actually has not been implemented yet. This next school year will be the first year that that's available to student teachers in school districts. So a school district can apply for one of these $5,000 grants, essentially to pass on to one or more student teachers in their school district to pay them to do some student teaching. Because students are doing all day, every day student teaching, and in our program, they're taking some classes on top of that. And that doesn't leave a lot of time for other things like part-time employment, those kind of where they are earning some additional money. So having this stipend helps kind of reduce the financial cost for students. So this is a new program that is starting. So we're kind of excited about that. And I think each district can get a $5,000 grant essentially from the state to pay for this. Now, I also think that you were talking about the student teacher permit and the advanced student teacher permits as well there, where they can be the teacher of record. So the student teacher permit that allows a school district to pay a student teacher, because currently for a school to pay them, they have to have some kind of permit or license, like a teaching license. So when they are still a student teacher and a pre-service teacher, they wouldn't have that yet. So they created this permit so that that can happen. But then the advanced student teacher permit that allows a student teacher to become fully employed as like a first year teacher with a school district, and they are the teacher of record. So like think about it in the fall when first grade classroom, you're going to see who your teacher is. The teacher listed on like the letter that the school sends you saying who your teacher is, that would be like a student teacher potentially, where they could be serving in that role. Those programs, those two permits, they've been around for a couple years now. We've had a handful of students do the advanced student teacher permit. It requires sign off by the school district. The student obviously has to agree to it, but then also the teacher prep program like USD or any of the others in the state would also need to sign off on that. We've done a handful of them. There haven't been a ton of requests for those, but there's certainly been a few. And it's, when we get to kind of later in the hiring season and someone decides, I'm not going to come back for next year, whatever the situation may be, there isn't a large pool to kind of choose from for new teachers. So they start looking at, well, who's a student teacher maybe that was already placed in my school district? Might they be interested in doing an advanced student teacher? And can we work that out with the district? So there's, we work together to try and make that happen when it makes sense for each individual situation.
I think that the stipend program with the $500,000, the brand new one that's going to start this fall, I think when you look at the big picture of it, it's actually going to come into play more significantly for those rural districts that have a harder time because, right, they're getting the $5,000, the same $5,000 that say Sioux Falls School District is getting is going to go a lot farther in a small rural community than it is in the large districts. So I think that sounds like an excellent way to get some recruitment into those smaller districts. Let's see. Does anybody else have any additional questions here? Comments, concerns, ideas, thoughts? Okay. Well, since we do have just a few more minutes, I wanted to ask people, since you are experts in the field of education, what are the Department of Education is a big thing on the national landscape right now. What are some potential implications in light of the changes with the Department of Education at the national level? And if the Department of Education is abolished at the national level, how does that impact our state? And how does the state handle that then? It's not just any state, but South Dakota. Dr. Mourlam, do you want to go first?
Sure. So this will be something certainly keep an eye on to see where this goes. I think kind of since the inception of the Department of Ed in like the early 80s, many people have been unhappy with it for whatever reasons. And, I think it's not so much of whether it goes away is the big question. I think the big question is, well, what role should the federal government have in education? I think that's really what the debate should be around, because I think that's maybe where some of the concerns might be. But like the Department of Ed provides a ton of funding. They through grants, loans, whether it's to schools directly or for its the student loan program. So I think there's certainly a lot of question around if the Department of Ed goes away, where do those programs go, and kind of what is the impact then on states like South Dakota. So it's certainly something to keep an eye on.
And from an economist viewpoint, Dr. Kopplin, what does that look like for you?
Certainly, things like title grants are coming into question, and so we worry about certain kinds of programs at the K-12 level. We also worry about opportunities for our tertiary students, funding research through national grants and title grants, those types of things. Mostly it turns into a budgetary concern, I think, for me at least, is how does each individual state sort of fill the gap, and so it makes me wonder whether alternative funding sources like a state income tax might be more possible if our state has to be more self-reliant and not reliant on the federal Department of Education. It's probably too early to tell, but I know that a couple of circumstances are probably more worried at the beginning now than others, but I don't think we can fully tell the total implications at this point.
Okay, but from what I'm understanding then is that there would have to be some significant changes in the South Dakota funding picture about how to raise the funds for education.
Sure, yeah, exactly.
And state income tax would probably come into the play in that discussion.
I think another piece to keep in mind here is also that, like, if the federal government, the services that they do provide, if they aren't providing those anymore, at the state level, how do we provide some of those same services? So that would be something to be considering as well.
What are some of those resources?
Well, I mean, they provide research grants, they provide student loans, they ensure that students with special needs have their needs met. So I think there's a variety of things at the federal level they're providing those services or the funding for those services to take place. So if those go away, how do those services not get lost? Because I think many of those services are important, and I think schools would certainly notice those things go away.
Okay, thank you for that. We are almost up against the 1 o'clock time frame, and everybody's lunch break will be over. Does anybody have any last minute questions or comments? Okay, well, I'm gonna cut it short here today for just a couple minutes left. I do want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Mourlam. Thank you, Dr. Kopplin, for what all you do in the field of education. Thank you for joining us today. I do want to welcome everybody to join us again in a couple of weeks when we're going to once again be talking about young people, but in particular, we're going to talk about the relationship or the link between social media usage and mental health. There's a significant correlation there. And we're going to dig into that and unpack that a little bit. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day. And I hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.